everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I will be doing my reading wrap-up for the end of December 2023 and the month of January. I will be mentioning a total of 4 books, all fiction, and then a few movies and TV shows as well. To start off, I am both glad and mildly disappointed to say I liked, but did not love, the penultimate piece of fiction I read in December, and thus 2023, which was Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. She chunky. This, what I'll call faux 19th century novel about the friendship and rivalry between 2 English magicians, the broader revival of English magic and fairy shenanigans, certainly had, yes, a lot of quiet charm. A decent serving of humour as well that I appreciated on the whole, and fully fleshed out, interesting characters and character relationships. I personally especially liked Jonathan Strange and his wife Arabella's. The magic in Miss Clarke's novel is deeply enmeshed with fairy lore, I believe pulled from real-world European, probably, fairy folklore, and I liked that, but it wasn't developed nearly enough for my taste, and I thus ultimately found it underwhelming. The narrative itself really, overall, felt underwhelming, because it lacked greater cohesion. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell's story is made up of a few different narrative strands. Stephen's, a black servant, was definitely the most noteworthy for me, as an FYI, and all of them do eventually come together, yes, but something just felt missing. Uncommitted to, emotionally under-delivering, a bit of all of the above, I suppose. Either way, there is nothing for it. I do not understand why this book was 1,000 pages long. Don't get me wrong, I mostly enjoyed my journey through this book, which I both read and listened to, meandering as it was at times, but yeah, no, that length did not feel justified to me, although, there's a lot worse coming up. I will say I liked the book's ending. It felt right, and more emotionally satisfying than not, with a moderately moving, bittersweet note, but won't say more than that, obviously. But it was also, and at the risk of repeating myself, ultimately underwhelming, given the 1,000 pages journey I took to reach it. I probably would have appreciated this novel a lot more had I a greater appreciation for 19th century literature, and weren't I so world-building and theming-driven as an SFF reader. Because yeah, I didn't get much in terms of theming either, outside of decent, but surface-level, commentary on classism, racism, and the historical, sure, north-south divide in English society. All of that said, I'm certainly glad I read this one, yes, and definitely wouldn't not recommend it, as I rated it with a 7 out of 10. But it is also unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely, I'll ever reread it. That being said, I might just check out the BBC miniseries at some point in the future. And also, to be honest, I will acknowledge that the too long feeling I mentioned is also highly dependent on whether or not you like or love a book or not. Right? One of my favorite books of all time is a chunky bish, and I could completely understand why someone else would find it too long if they didn't love what they were reading. So it's all subjective at the end of the day, isn't it? I don't have much to say about the very last piece of fiction I read in 2023, and as an FYI, no, I didn't mention it in my second half of 2023 tier list, but I'll mention it nonetheless for completeness' sake. It was the novella Anachrony, written and self-published, I believe, by author Susanna Imaginário. Important bit of context here, this novella was written as a companion piece to the author's main fantasy series titled Timelessness. I picked it up in spite of that because it was recommended by my bestest bookish friend. Unfortunately, I do think one, yes, needs to read the author's main series to really appreciate this novella, and thus do not feel comfortable giving it a fixed rating. It just wouldn't be fair for me to do so. Still, what I'll say is that I enjoyed the smoothness of the author's writing, and the multiple references to pagan mythologies, chiefly Greek and Norse, I encountered in Anachrony have, yes, increased my interest in the main timelessness series. My feelings are more reserved when it comes to the usage of time travel or time loops, but that's because I'm just always going to be wary of that at this point. Regardless, I'm now more curious than not to see if and how it is used in the main series, although I really don't know when I'll actually get to it. Now on to 2024. The first book I read in January was Gavriel Kay's Tigana. This fantasy novel tells the story of a people, the Tiganesa, from the eponymous land of Tigana, living on a fictional peninsula called the Palm, loosely inspired by or based on early modern Italy and its city-states, whose identity, whose very name, has been erased by magic after conquest by a tyrant sorcerer from somewhere up north in their world. Well, okay, not quite. What I described there is the setting and basic premise of Tigana. Its actual plot centers on a set of characters who all originally came from conquered and spiritually erased Tigana, and who want to overthrow its tyrant in order to, at the very least, restore their cultural identity to broader awareness, because said tyrant's spell literally makes it impossible for anyone but Tiganesa to hear and remember the name of their homeland. A few secondary characters hail from the eastern side of the Palm, which was, for its part, conquered by another tyrant sorcerer from somewhere up north as well, and they also want to bump him off. I principally read this because my ex David liked it, and to a lesser extent because Mr. K is known for beautifully written, historical feeling fantasy. I thus figured I might as well sample some of his work, but alas, I did not care for it. I didn't care about anything or anyone in this book, barring a character named Dianora and her plotline, though I didn't much like its conclusion. I could sort of tell Tigana wanted me to experience tragic, or more broadly grandiose feelings of cultural and personal grief for one's identity, homeland, freedom, etc., yet none of it landed. It just felt like the book was trying too hard to tug at my heartstrings, but outside of a mild initial interest, and then a mild interest in a supernatural element that was thrown in mid-plot and wasn't ultimately made much of, all I really experienced was a feeling of boredom and disconnection. The book's prose was fine to good. Hell, I'll be nice and say I found it decently inspiring in a few places. The pacing, however, was uneven. There wasn't much narrative tension for most of the book, then all of a sudden the story shifted into violent armed conflict during the span of its last chapter, and once again none of it landed for me on an emotional level. The world building was fine as well. Tigana read like pseudo-historical fiction in places. Magic exists in the novel's world, but it had no rules that I could glean. Demonic, zombie-like spirits popped up at one point, which piqued my interest, like I already said, but nothing much was ultimately made of them, so whatever. I liked the pagan-feeling theology and theological imagery of the Palm, and that's about it. As to the theming, I can sort of see, as through a glass darkly, if you will, what the author wanted to accomplish with Tigana. His own afterword also helped. With regards to discussing cultural identity, its disappearance, and the dilemma posed by a nationalistic adjacent desire to preserve it at all costs, or in terms of discussing the value of transnational or transcultural cooperation in the fight against foreign oppression and tyrannical rule. These are certainly interesting and weighty themes, yes, but I just don't think they were particularly well executed in Tigana. Additionally, there was, yes, a smidge of hashtag stick with me MWSARP, i.e. men writing sex and romance poorly. A romance with absolutely no setup whatsoever drops in the book's penultimate chapter, or thereabouts. A couple others also counted as instances of insta-love, so blech. And basically all of the sex scenes in Tigana felt contrived, to greater or lesser extents. To be clear though, I was never offended as such by the book's sex scenes or its female characterization. That being said, do keep in mind, my bar for this stuff is also pretty low at this point, given some of the shit I've read, so make of that what you will. So yeah, this was unfortunately a rather poor start to my reading year, though there's so much worse coming up. I'll concede it's always possible. The fact I listened to this on audiobook and over the course of a trip to Ireland that had my attention firmly centered elsewhere, chiefly on my boyfriend, didn't help me to feel engaged with the story in this case, but still, I stand by my appraisal of the material. It was mediocre overall, and I duly rated Tigana with a 6 out of 10. So Tigana sadly kicked off a rather poor start to my reading year, but then, as I intimated a couple of times now, it got much worse, because the one other thing I read in January was David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, a sprawling 1,400 pages long, hell, 1,600 pages long if you add all the fucking endnotes, chonker of a general fiction novel that barely qualifies as such in my book. I decided, against my better judgment, and my own self-worth, clearly, to force myself through this bish, because my dear ex-David thought I would get a measure of humour-laden enjoyment and meaning, presumably, out of this one. Now, my bestest bookish friend has also read this thing and basically warned me, point blank, I probably would not like it, yet I stubbornly decided to go through with it. I tried going into Infinite Jest with as open a mind as I could muster, and having now actually accomplished the feat of reading through David Foster Wallace's magnum opus, I didn't think it was complete garbage, but I, yes, still hated it. I hated this sprawling, indulgently excessive, try-hardy mess of a text, out of which I got next to nothing proportionally, because again, let me remind you, this bitch is 1,400 pages long in terms of relatable, meaningful, or worthwhile intellectual, much less emotional engagement. This fucking thing hurt my brain. It made me feel like I was being force-fed a decadent Roman orgy of words, all to no truly worthy end. There was no real plot in Infinite Jest. The book's structure it makes me feel sorry towards all of the novels I've previously criticized on structural grounds. It was that bad. I didn't give a shit about the characters. The lightly speculative world-building attempted in Wallace's book was woefully underdeveloped and misutilized, and the little bit of genuinely good, yes, theming there was in Infinite Jest just got lost in the nauseating sauce of its indulgent and indulgently chaotic excess. The endnotes can also, for their part, go sit on a field of cactuses. That being said, I'll give Infinite Jest the following. It made me realize horseshoe theory can, in fact, yes, be applied to literature. But if you want to listen to me elaborate upon that specific point, you'll have to wait for the reading vlog come sort of book review I plan on uploading in the very near future. So, yep, Infinite Jest was not my cup of tea. Worse than that, it kind of sent me into a mini reading slump, and I've already removed another chonky book from my 2024 TBR because my brain just noped the fuck out. I just hated this bitch. Wow. And thus rated it with a 3 to soft 3.5 out of 10. Fuck my life. And so I watched a bunch of science fiction and fantasy movies and TV shows during my trip to Ireland and my most recent stay with my boyfriend, so I'll quickly go over them now. First, I'll mention the anime Cyberpunk Edgerunners, a story about a group of so-called netrunners set in the world of Cyberpunk 2077, which I haven't yet played myself, but have watched a friend play a fair bit of. I enjoyed it overall, mostly because it references the world of the game a lot, in a way that was very obviously recognizable to me, and because I found the color palette actually specifically used in the animation absolutely gorgeous. Then I guess I can add the story featured a romance I thought was decently well executed for Troopers. And yeah, pretty bittersweet ending. I felt fit the characters' arcs and the story's tone and natural progression to a T. So on the whole, this one was a very solid 7 out of 10 for me. I also watched Pokémon Concierge, a 4-part stop-motion micro-series is what I'm going to call it, about a resort where Pokemon and their trainers can go to enjoy some R&R, and centered on a young woman named Haru, who starts working there as the new Pokemon Concierge. This thing was one giant shot of wholesome, heartwarming, and yes, tear-inducing cuteness, plain and simple, and the only complaint I have about it, genuinely, is that it was too short. It pleased both my former child self, what was left of it, and my current adult self, and for what it was essentially perfect. Yes, I'm biased. No, I don't care. It was a 10 out of 10 for me. I also watched 3 Studio Ghibli movies. The 2 I watched in Ireland were Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind, okay, I know, technically a proto-Studio Ghibli movie, and Princess Mononoke, finally. The former is my boyfriend's favourite Ghibli movie and qualifies in my book as post-apocalyptic or post-collapse science fiction. Indeed, the story is set far into the future, when the world is slowly succumbing to a huge fungi and bug-infested forest, seemingly inimical to what remains of human life, and home to ginormous sentient arthropods called the Omu. Narratively, it centers on Nausicaä, a princess who seeks to understand the forest and its denizens, and who comes to believe they are not, in fact, enemies of humanity. Princess Mononoke, for its part, is mythological fantasy rooted in the mythic history of Japan, and features a clash between 3 cultures or stages of human technological development, kind of. Our main character, Ashitaka, the prince of an agrarian people called the Amishi, becomes cursed by a bull god, then leaves his homeland at the beginning of the story and eventually makes his way to Irontown, a place where, as the name suggests, ironworks are carried out. There, he meets its leader, a woman named Eboshi, and learns that she and the town as a whole are in conflict with San, also known as Princess Mononoke, an orphan who was raised by a wolf goddess and acts as a representative and defender of nature, more or less. Because to produce their iron, the people of Irontown have had to strip the surrounding countryside of its wild woodland. Unfortunately for Ashitaka, it is within the remains of this wild woodland that a cure might potentially be found for his curse. My ex David thought I would really enjoy and vibe with this one, and actually wanted to watch it with me. We never got around to doing so, but he suspected correctly. I really loved Princess Mononoke, just like I really loved Nausicaä of the Valley of the Wind. Both, in fact, are now my favourite Studio Ghibli movies, in no small part because of their very similar themes on environmental preservation, ecological balance, and the relationship between humankind and the rest of the natural world, with some spirituality injected in all of that. I think they pair really nicely, and as I found both of them beautiful, poetic, and oh yes, very moving, I'd give both of them a very rock-solid 8.5 out of 10. So yes, I get it now. I get the love and respect for Studio Ghibli. I really do. And so then in January, I watched my 5th, technically 6th, Ghibli movie, Spirited Away, which I guess qualifies as a portal fantasy of sorts, given it follows a child character named Sen, as she and her parents accidentally stumble into the realm of the spirits and get stuck there. Sen then has to work for a witch named Yubaba. Am I the only one who was reminded of the Baba Yaga there? Who runs a luxury resort for spirits in order to free herself and her parents, who have, in the meantime, been transformed into pigs. Am I the only one who was reminded of the Odyssey there? I found this one sweet and charming. I liked that it featured the trope wherein spoopy things, such as gluttonous spirits, yes, I'm talking about No-Face here, and wrinkled witches turn out to have a soft, or at the very least non-scary side. And I like the fairy tale whimsy of it all. is how I'll put it. But I didn't find it as moving or inspiring as Nausicaä or Mononoke, nor even as Howl's Moving Castle, I don't think. That may largely be due to the fact Spirited Away centers on a child character, and that's just never going to be my thing from the outset. So this one was an enjoyable 7 out of 10 for me. And also, as a little addendum, was anyone else reminded of Little Nightmares watching Spirited Away? Or I mean, is Little Nightmares inspired by Spirited Away, but like, you know, it twists it into a horror game? Because honestly, the parallels were very obvious to me, but maybe that's just a me thing. Leaving the realm of poetic anime now, I also watched Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, this is not actually a real adaptation satire of Robert A. Heinlein's novel of the same name. And it was fun, overall. Ultimately, though, I guess I wanted something deeper, maybe, and that's just not that kind of movie, which is fine. I really enjoyed the televised propaganda bits of the movie, specifically, so I'll give it that. And as to the giant bugs, those were fine. A bit silly, but again, that's just because it's that kind of movie. So yeah, I'd say this one was a 6.5 out of 10 for me. Maybe I just missed a lot of things, I don't know, but that's what it was for me. From satire, I then went on to sort of parody with Galaxy Quest, a movie that more or less goes, what would happen if you took washed out and disillusioned actors from Star Trek, or I mean something like Star Trek, and put them in a real-life science fiction context. Featuring, moreover, Alan Rickman, Sigourney Weaver, and Tim Allen. Damn. But so, there again, it was decent fun. I actually really liked the benevolent aliens in this one. They were undoubtedly very goofy, yes, but they were also just really nice. Just nice aliens. But beyond that, yeah, no, that was about it. It was certainly a nice way to spend the evening, but if I had to choose, yeah, I think I preferred Starship Troopers overall, so I'll give Galaxy Quest a respectable 6 out of 10. I hope you all had a decent to hopefully positive start to your reading and whatever else year. And on that final note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support. And I shall see you all reasonably, yes, soon in the next video. But until then, bye-bye.